Now that we're entering year 3 of Genshin's timeline, the existing pool of characters has had a good amount of time to flesh itself out. Each element with the exception of Dendro has at least half a dozen characters, enough to where we can ascertain a specific role they and the represented element are supposed to fulfill. By this point, the majority of the player base has gathered enough empirical data on where characters stand relative to each other, and miHoYo has hopefully kept this information in mind when designing new releases. So far that seems to be the case. They've been quite conservative about making characters overly broken, seeing as the latest tier 0 unit was Yelan several months ago. Everyone else ends up somewhere between tier 1 to 3, which is where most characters should be. The first wave of units from version 1 like Bennett, Ganyu, Hu Tao, Xingqiu, Zhongli, Xiangling and whatnot were designed with a universal scope, not really catering towards a specific niche or win condition. If your goal was to boost attack, chain reactions, heal your party or whatnot, they would serve as blanket statement choices. Appropriately so, given that early on there weren't a whole lot of options. This would have the unintended consequence of them being extremely overpowered for how all-encompassing they were. Throughout most of version 2 and version 3, however, I noticed a pattern when it came to newer characters in relation to old ones, especially for supports. Characters are beginning to hone in on a target playstyle where they can only perform efficiently in that respect and not as much otherwise. So I wanted to make a video discussing what I call exclusive supports, characters whose entire identity caters towards a specific niche. It's something that was in the back of my mind ever since Xinhe, but now that more and more units behave like her, there's now a decent sample size to cover. Before we continue on with the video though, I want to give a shout out to today's sponsor, Outplayed. For the uninitiated, Outplayed is a video capturing software on Overwolf that works for most if not all mainstream games out there. If you're a fan of recording and sharing clips in Genshin, this is arguably the best way to do it. Outplayed captures any interesting highlights during your play or allows you to record manually using a hotkey. You can then immediately upload it to your Discord server, YouTube, Twitter, Reddit, anywhere you feel like sharing. The app also has a built-in video editor, so you can make your clips look pretty, and it works for tons of games besides Genshin Impact. You can use it for Monster Hunter World, GTA 5, Among Us, Warhammer, and others. For those of you who already use Overwolf, then downloading is a very easy process. Should you be interested in using Outplayed, feel free to use the link on screen or in the description. It's a very simple but cool app that makes recording highlights easier for you. Thanks again to Outplayed for sponsoring the video as always, but for now, let's get back into it. So going back to the notion of early characters being all-purpose while newer ones are more specialized, this occurs in almost all gacha titles, not just Genshin. Early on, the limited number of units make exploring teams, strategies, and whatnot somewhat restricted. Developers are usually aware of this and try to make their starting units applicable in as many situations as possible, or make the initial content rudimentary and leave the more multi-layered stuff for the future. How efficiently characters perform has a lot to do with how much variety is demanded by the game mechanics and systems put in place. It takes a year or two before enough characters are made available for you to have multiple choices for things, so around the 2nd to 3rd year, depending on how fast the developers make new banners, is where most gachas find that sweet spot. Players have a wide range of options for teams, allowing them to theorize the most efficient ways to take on the game's content. As time progresses and the pool of available units grows in size, developers are faced with a choice. Obviously, they want players to keep pulling for new units to make money, but that becomes increasingly more difficult since players eventually reach a point where they have enough to handle everything there is. So there's two options. Either make new characters just straight up more powerful or effective than whatever exists, famously known as power creep, or make new characters with a defined playstyle, something unique. Presently, Genshin is at that stage, releasing only 1 or 2 newcomers per version, but since the game's combat and content are more simplified than other established gachas, the scale of progression more or less evens out. My guess is that miHoYo never intended for units like Bennett or Xingqiu to be as versatile and all-purpose as they are, though it would be in poor taste to nerf them, as some players actively spend money on the game to acquire them. So instead, I believe they're trying to ensure new units wouldn't be as ridiculously overpowered, leading to rather mixed results. Some turned out okay like Xinhe and Goro, others not so much like Toma and Sayu. Supports were affected by this the most. For main DPSers, the main concern is just how much damage they can do and how easily that can be achieved. In a contest of strictly numbers, Ayaka reigns supreme over Ganyu, Hu Tao is stronger than Diluc, Shogun is better than Keqing. This isn't a statement of opinion, it's fact, they have better numbers. Thing is, supports are a bit more open-ended in this department. Their performance ultimately hinges on who they're supporting, what they provide, and who they're working with, which is where the category of exclusive supports came from. Exclusive supports, or ES units as I'll call them from here on out, are characters who are only practical for a certain team composition or for making the most use out of a certain mechanic. Given that this can be left up to interpretation, I consider any character an ES if most if not all of their abilities are clearly directed at something and not meant to be used by all. For example, a universal or general support would be Bennett. While he is the pyro character, Fantastic Voyage provides a massive attack buff and regeneration that is received well by virtually the entire cast. Another one would be Kazuha, whose elemental damage boost works with everyone who is in Eula. These units are rated very highly not only for their strength, but the number of situations they're suited for. A prime case of an ES unit would be Goro. He is completely worthless in any team composition except Geo, as his elemental skill requires at least 2 other Geo units to unlock his full potential. When the conditions are met, Goro is a vital asset to his team, providing arguably more buffs than even Bennett. It's just a shame that it's attached to the worst element in the game. Goro stands out the most, but pretty much every half-decent support released after Kokomi bears some trace of exclusivity. Shinhe is an incredible character, highly underrated in my opinion, but that's likely due to how situational she is. Her elemental skill increases the strength of all forms of cryo damage, including other cryo units' skill and bursts based on Shinhe's attack, while her elemental burst increases cryo damage dealt and shreds cryo and physical resistance of all enemies caught within. So in layman's terms, she's only useful in cryocentric teams. Thankfully, Chain Freeze is one of the most heavily used comps in the game, so anyone who does have her runs her alongside Ayaka and or Ganyu for the same reason players run Goro with Ito or Noelle. The trend of ES characters has been getting more noticeable as of late. Kuki Shinobu, while not as conspicuous based on the text in her moveset, heavily suggests she was meant to be used for Dendro-based reactions. Her elemental skill is perfectly timed for Hyper Bloom, while her elemental burst works nicely for Aggravate. For her to be disappointingly overwhelming on release, and now a very strong character who happens to fit both electro-based Dendro reactions, can't be a mere coincidence. This reached a fever pitch when Nilo was brought to us not too long ago. She's a Hydro character who greatly boosts the potency of the reaction Bloom. Her first Ascension passive states your entire party must consist of Hydro and Dendro units and at least one of each, to which she then amplifies their elemental mastery and transforms Dendro cores into Bountiful cores, exploding right as soon as they spawn. Regarding Bountiful cores, the more HP you have on Nilo, the more damage you can deal with those cores thanks to her other Ascension passive. If it wasn't obvious, Nilo can only function at her best in Hydro-Dendro teams, and no amount of copium will persuade otherwise. I don't care how many of you think Vaporized Nilo is viable, it's not, I'm sorry. Something tells me 90% of all supports hereafter will be exclusive in some way, shape, or form. This is the only way they can maintain a stable and healthy power scaling. The last thing they want to do is make another Bennett or Xingqiu that would actually do more harm than good for players. With all that being said, while ES characters are definitely the correct option for Genshin's current stage of its development, that comes with its own set of problems that miHoYo should keep an eye on. I'm gonna go through 2 positive things about them before talking about 2 potentially negative ones. The first pro, and it's the one I'm most hopeful for, is that ES units may allow for weaker or previously underperforming characters and or parties to become stronger. One major difference between other gachas in Genshin is that it spends a lot of time on every character, whether top tier or bottom tier, 4-star or 5-star. Each unit since Klee has received a collected miscellany, a character demo, and reveal trailer, with 5 stars receiving a teaser on top of that. It's very apparent that more attention is given to each individual unit beyond their moveset and a few lines of flavor text. This can work for or against them. For powerful ones like Shogun, Ayaka, Hu Tao, and Kokomi, that only adds a more pressing reason for you to be attached to the character. The waifu and husbandoism is strong in this game. Naturally, players hope for their favorite characters to be strong so they don't feel bad using them. Amber and Xinyan mains, I salute you for staying loyal in spite of how garbage they are. No offense, of course. However, just like how miHoYo isn't too keen on nerfing overpowered units, they don't really feel like buffing underpowered ones either. They made one exception for Zhongli after a substantial amount of public backlash from all over the world, but I doubt they're willing to do that again. That doesn't mean they won't try to find other ways to breathe new life into struggling cast members. Kokomi was considered by many to be one of the worst 5 stars in the game when she arrived in version 2.1 due to early perceptions of what constituted a strong character. But through more experimentation, discovery, the mainstream recognition of reaction-focused comps, and the growing need for units who could wear multiple hats, Kokomi was elevated to a point where her usefulness almost rivals that of Xingqiu, who was beyond the shadow of a doubt the most dominant Hydro character and a contender for one of the top 3 best units in the game. Technically, Kokomi is not an ES unit, nor was she indirectly buffed by them. She was always good, it just took a while for us to see it. But ES units can provide much needed help by offering benefits that are more in tune with what a character wants to do. Yunjin was a welcome addition for Yoimiya, whose method of combat entails normal attacks, something the former is able to augment through Constellations 2 and 6. We already went over how Goro is probably the only reason mono Geo teams are even the slightest bit viable. Basically what I'm trying to say is, Xinyan and Razor mains keep juicing up on that good shit. I promise you sometime in 2023 you'll get some Poggers physical damage support character who will make you relevant again. Now the second pro is a simple but meaningful one. ES units can slow down the rate of power creep by staying in their lane. Every once in a while we get a jack of all trades, master of all that takes over everyone's parties, but otherwise ES units are very good at what they do without bleeding into other areas, thus promoting more character diversity. Generalists are meant to take care of every situation in a broad or superficial sense because you don't want them to render every other option irrelevant. Specialists can go deeper in their line of work and get more mileage out of it. Since they only affect a small group of characters and not everyone, that leaves the door open for more supports to be included for other groups, ultimately giving players a reason to try out more characters. There's nothing wrong with having all-purpose characters. Not everyone has the time or desire to investigate off-meta strategies, quote-unquote, and just want to autopilot through the game. So having your Bennett's, Kazuhas, Xingqius, Zhonglis are a necessary evil. Genshin founded itself on being easy to pick up and casual-friendly. Sometimes you just want to turn your brain off. All the same, giving players the freedom to choose is what's important, and I'm glad miHoYo is creating more opportunities for party diversity. All of this is in concept, by the way. It's entirely possible for you to full clear every dungeon, domain, boss, or spiral abyss using the same 4 to 8 characters. I've expressed my frustrations with the lack of endgame content far too many times already. For those who are bored of using the same characters though, they now have other options to play with. That is, if they have access to those options in the first place, bringing us to the first and most glaring issue of this approach. ES units are paradoxical in a way. Their core purpose is to encourage you to try out different parties and strategies by retroactively buffing them in the hopes that they can at least compete with whatever's all the rage at the current moment. But in order to do so, you need all or most of the other pieces to make that happen, and that can alienate players who don't have them either because they don't want to spend money or were not playing during that time. Say you just acquired Yunjin and were lucky enough to get her to C6, but for whatever reason you don't have Ayato, Yoimiya, or Hu Tao, 3 5-star DPSers who enjoy the normal attack support. This makes her all but useless as she doesn't offer any other boosts. If we're splitting hairs, her support can be thought of as universal on anyone who uses normal attacks like Shogun, Razor, and stuff. But you get the idea. The ones Yunjin works best with may not be accessible to everyone. Some may argue that's the point. ES units are intended to be situational, and I agree. Normally their conditionality alone wouldn't be much of a problem if they were freely available to everyone. If we were playing, say, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, excluding DLC fighters, having a secondary character for situational matchups is perfectly fine if not encouraged because you have access to the entire roster whenever you please. In a gacha title like Genshin, the only way to acquire new characters is by pulling for them, and no matter how lucky you are, no one can get every character through free gems alone, I don't care who you are. This can adversely affect the player's experience with the character. If they're a huge fan of Shinhe and love her design and gameplay but don't have Ayaka, Ganyu, or Eula to complete the other half of the equation, they'll be left with the sense of disappointment that they can't make the most out of her just because they weren't around during Ayaka, Ganyu, or Eula's banners. Or because, understandably, they don't have the wherewithal to spend however many hundreds of dollars per month on every character. And remember, players are heavily invested in Genshin's characters compared to other games. There's a lot more emphasis on playing a character because you have a personal attachment to them, not because they give you the best results. That doesn't mean players don't care about character strength though. For all of you Amber mains watching this, I bet you desperately wish she was just as strong as Hu Tao. ES units are perfectly fine in a vacuum, but the circumstances surrounding gacha games actively work against them, begging the question, how exclusive should they really be? For instance, going back to Nilou's Court of Dancing Petals, was it really necessary for her entire party to have to consist of Dendro and Hydro characters? Why couldn't they just say, if there's at least one Dendro unit in her party and leave it at that? It's not like she's this OP Super Saiyan meta-shattering unit that does billions of damage, and that segues nicely into the second problem. Given that obtaining all the specific pieces of the puzzle obligates you to invest a lot of time, resources, and most importantly money, for ES units to be desirable they have to be really easy to come across and are overtuned to compensate for not being all-purpose. The reason Banish, Xiangling, and Xingqiu make up the trinity of busted 4 stars is because aside from having really effective abilities, they're 4 stars, therefore being easy to max constellation, and there were multiple opportunities to get them for free. In contrast, to obtain someone like Nilou or Shinhe, you have to make a conscious decision to spend X amount of Primo Gems while having their corresponding Dendro and Cryo units to make actual use of their stuff. Even then, I'm not too sure about Nilou, but the only place where Shinhe outperforms other supports is in freeze comps, as she's the only one who can easily supplement Ayaka and Ganyu while boosting damage. Diona, Rosaria, and Chi-Chi are a bit less damage oriented. To their credit, many ES units are 4 stars, Goro, Yunjin, Shinobu, Candice, Sada, what have you, so if nothing else, they're accessible. And fortunately, a party can have up to 3 supports and 1 main DPS, so it's not like ES units have to directly compete with general supports for a slot. You can very easily fit Xingqiu and Shinhe into one party, or Yunjin and Bennett. In the future though, I can see this becoming more and more difficult as you get more characters that players want to use. Only time will tell. What do you guys think about exclusive supports? Do you enjoy the direction miHoYo is going with them or not? Let me know in the comments down below. For now, if you enjoyed the video, please be sure to leave a like and subscribe. Consider following me on Twitter @VarsVaram, joining my Discord server, and if you'd like to support the channel, check out my Patreon page. By donating, you get access to benefits for all 3 of my channels, Vars, Vars2, and Vars3. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.